Right, and we're live.
Okay, welcome everybody. Everyone's familiar with Zoom these days. If you're not, you can post a question in the text chat. But my animated screen that I'm sharing at the moment is just a reminder that you may want to open the participants panel and open the text chat panel so that you can post questions in and interact and respond to questions that we may ask or the guest speakers may ask. And you need to manage the windows, so you might want to turn off the full screen default so that you can drag things around and so on. We're recording. There is a transcript, as we've just been discussing, and you can turn on the live transcript button on the bottom of your Zoom interface as well. So welcome to this session entitled Knowing What They Know. And if for those that have been to the Future Teacher sessions before, we're now running these topics for a third time under the banner of Reflected. So more reflection, and there's a little summary on the page here. We'll put this link in the text chat. More reflection on the topics. Sometimes we'll have guest speakers that have presented in previous years revisiting us and sharing how their practice has matured. There's a panel that describes us, the kind of core team, but then you'll be introduced to each of the guest speakers. And there's a panel that describes the guest speakers and their sessions. We don't have a visual of it, but Lillian usually does an analysis of what you all said you most wanted to learn from today's session. So do you want to just quickly summarize that, Lillian?
Yeah, 5 key points. We had 70 people sign up for the webinar, and quite a lot of them wanted to know how students perceive the use of polling in class. So it's really good that we've got Emily and Kate to give us that perspective. And then many people wanted to hear about anything new and innovative in terms of techniques for getting feedback from students, how academics are making choices about what tools to use and when to kind of gain student feedback. And people did mention about the dialogic approaches and small group teaching. They were quite interested in that. And finally, just quite a lot of learning technologists who attend like to find out how to encourage staff to adopt more accessible habits when it comes to using polling tools. So that's the summary. So yeah, without further ado, what I'm going to do is let's get started with our presentations. And we've got Emily and Kate to kick us off. Emily's currently a third-year student at the University of York, studying interactive media. And Kate graduated earlier this year. She's working as a business and management consultant in Klein and Company. Now, they did a little bit of research for us last year on what the students thought about how educators use polling. And they also tied this in with a small focus group with lecturers about what they thought they were doing great. So they've done a really good presentation and paper around this. So yeah, over to Emily and Kate to share their results.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So yes, hello everyone. Thank you for coming today. We're very excited to present some research we did. Just a little bit of background before we start. So we did an internship in the summer of 2021, and this was mostly because of the rise of conferencing due to video conferencing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we knew that there had been a rise in what we call live interactive polling through the use of conferencing, but there wasn't a lot of data on how this was used, how well it was implemented, and whether students actually were engaging with this kind of topics. So before we get started, just a few definitions we want to go over in our presentation. So the term live interactive polling basically refers to any kind of polling in which the questions and answers are coming in live. So think Mentimeter, even the Zoom integrated polls, as well as Turning Point. So that's one key term we'll be defining. This can be online or in person. We may use the term question type basically meaning, is it a multiple choice question? Is it one where students are going to input their answers, that sort of thing. We have question intent, and this is a little bit more focused in the report, but we will be mentioning it in our presentation today, which basically describes the intent behind a question. Is it to test knowledge, or is it to allow students to reflect on their knowledge? And finally, what we're really going to be focusing on today for this webinar is engagement and usefulness. So essentially, how engaging do students find live interactive polling, and how useful do they find it to their learning?
So the project itself was a collaboration between University of York and Turning Technologies. And we had three main aims. First of all, of course, improve business research on the topic of live polling. The second one was to understand if live interactive polling actually worth it. And the final one was to find out how to improve live polling apps. So we had 6 hypotheses tested. All of them were confirmed, but our main one, which we'll be talking about today, is that online polls are more useful and engaging than in-person live interactive polls.
So the way we did this, we ran 2 questionnaires. We had a student questionnaire, which had 198 responses, and then we had a lecturer or teacher questionnaire, which had 28 responses. And this is just to kind of get our biases out the way. So this is some of the demographic data that we received. And so we kind of go further into that further. So we asked the majority of our participants if they had participated in or conducted a live interactive poll, including teachers, and we had 82.2% online, 68.9% in person. So all of our data kind of just shrunk that down to just those percentages. And for the rest of the graphs, you'll see it's all out of 100%. So just to get that out the way. So something that a lot of people are interested in is what the preferred software is and what's been used. So as you can see, based on this graph, we found that Mentimeter was the most popular amongst students and lecturers. This was cited because of how visual it was, how easy it was to set up. And as you can see, out of all the ones that were preferred, it had a 49.3% preference compared to Kahoot, Zoom polls, Turning Point, Collaborate polls, etc. And now we get into what's really interesting in terms of our data from the questionnaire. So we asked the question to students. So this is not asking lecturers. We had separate questionnaire for them. So to what extent is live interactive polling engaging when learning remotely versus in person? And what you can see here is this distribution curve that skews towards the left of it being more engaging than not, with 38.4% compared to 33.8% in person for very engaging, and 53.5% compared to 46.5% for somewhat engaging. And through our poll, we discovered that this was because of the format inherently. If you're going to have a poll, it's much quicker to click a link and open it into a new window, rather than being in a class and having to get your phone out or your laptop out, etc., to get that started. But we explored this further with focus groups that we also conducted.
In focus groups, we found out that students find online polls during online lecture engaging because it's different to like an old and recorded lecture. It's interactive, it keeps students awake, it keeps their attention. And of course, also students feel online lecture to be closer to a live lecture because they have a chance to interact with the lecturer and ask questions.
So kind of keeping this graph in your head, especially with the 53.5 online for somewhat engaging, we go to our second main question, which was to what extent did students find live interactive polling useful? And as you can see, there is a bit of a drop. That's our 5-minute warning. So as you can see, there is still a left-leaning curve towards it being more useful, so very positive skew. However, as you can see, the numbers have dropped from approximately 33% and 53% to 27 and 50. And this was actually quite interesting. And what we kind of found in our questionnaire was that a lot of students described the fact that, despite the fact that it was online, it was because more fun, it was more easy to engage with, but inherently how useful directly it was to their learning was something that was a bit more debated. And this was explored further in our focus groups.
Our main conclusion from that is that there is a trade-off between usefulness and engagement. Because if the poll is engaging, then it means that it's useful as well, because students pay more attention. And of course, if a poll is useful, then it should be engaging as well. So there is like a balance between both meanings.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just to add from our questionnaire, because I forgot to mention it, that the only kind of hesitation as to why it was slightly less useful was just the fact that it was very difficult to pinpoint. When you do a live interactive poll, you're not learning something necessarily, you are honing in your skills. And so that's why it's kind of like directly in terms of the impact of learning is more difficult to measure. And that's what participants explained. So we also wanted to look at willingness to participate, and we narrowed this down based on those who had done both and more generally, so that's the left and right respectively. And as you can see that actually the majority of students actually had no preference, though followed by online coming in second. When we looked into this, the main reasoning behind this was the fact that so long as the poll was useful and engaging to their learning, they didn't mind if it was online and in person. However, there was that skew towards saying, however, that is a bit more seamless and a bit faster when it is just done online rather than in person.
So our main conclusion from that research is that live interactive polling increases student engagement and enhances the learning experience.
So though we can't share our entire report with you today, we did actually make a word cloud based on everything that we did. You can see based on our qualitative data, the main key terms that pop out that support our overall hypotheses. So you can see easier, choice, helps, engaging, useful, etc. But we did want to give you some practical ways that we were found through the report that you can read in your own time as well for further advice. But we wanted to share with you just some key takeaways to help improve your own live interactive polls.
So in terms of question type, students prefer multiple choice question and focus questions rather than open-ended. Then in terms of question intent, students enjoy more to reflect on their progress or leave a feedback rather than have a basic knowledge test. Then time, so polls should be short, and also they should be introduced in the beginning or in the middle of the lecture, but not in the end, because in the end of the lecture, students just want to leave earlier. And visuals, students really value visuals like pictures, videos, and everything else, because it's make poll more engaging, more beautiful, and it enhances the live poll.
Additionally, we found out some missing features in some software. So this included having the more competitive points-based system that you have in Kahoot and having that integrated into other apps. So that might be something to think about. Competition was something that came up in our report. Very crucially, in terms of access and participation, what we learned is that anonymity is really, really important, because not only does it mean that students who are more introverted or shy are able to participate and have their voice heard, it also means that students who may be more neurodiverse or struggle to voice their opinions then are able to have that access. And anonymity really does genuinely make a difference to the number of students who will participate in your poll. And finally, and most crucially, we have communication. And what we mean by this is that it is not just enough just to do a one-off poll, see that not many people have not participated in it, and just leave it at that. Polls should be done consistently, once a week, once every 2 weeks, etc. And afterwards, you should speak to your students about what works best for them, because every subject, every student cohort will have their own preferences and their own way of learning. So ultimately, you should adapt your polls to students' needs. And ultimately, that's what we want the main takeaway to be. So thank you very much. And we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm sorry you had to kind of condense your presentation and hard work into such a short period of time. I've added a link in the chat to your full report that's on our WordPress site, and people should feel free to review that, because I think it's very relevant to us. It's one of the first few reports to come out that talked about polling when a lot of students were experiencing online learning as opposed to in lecture or in class polling. So I think we wanted to make sure that we were capturing that change in practice and to see if there was any difference in effect. So yeah, I think feel free to look at the questions in the chat and answer them in the chat, and we'll come back to them in the discussion at the end. But next up, we have Mary Jacob and Tamsin Davis from Aberystwyth University, and they're going to be presenting on their use of dialogic approaches through online group tutorials, and how they've built up this kind of small community of practice to kind of help students feel comfortable in kind of communicating back with their tutors. So over to Mary and Tamsin.
Thank you. So let me just bring this up. And I will start this presentation, and you should be able to see the presentation. So
Yep, it's all working.
Fantastic. So thank you all for coming along. So we're going to talk about a specific case study of using dialogic feedback in online group tutorials, but this is extensible to other kinds of teaching contexts. So it's not just our very specific type of case study. So the first thing where I wanted to start is to talk about what is dialogic feedback. And I really like David Carlos' definitions here. He talks about the heart of it as being interactive exchanges where meanings are negotiated between the staff and the teacher and the students and among students. And as one might imagine, trust is absolutely crucial to make that happen. So we're going to talk about how you can build that trust. So if you're having a dialogue, it's like everybody's sitting in a circle, and I'm going to invite you to find whoever looks the closest to what you look like. That's the teacher, and everybody else are your students. So it's that sort of community of practice kind of idea. And it's intended to be validating for everyone who's in that group. So I used 5 different pedagogical ideas in these particular sessions. I'll give you a very brief look at those. So the first one we talked about already is dialogic feedback. The other one, which was my first time to really use this in my own practice, is vicarious learning. So Micheline Chi talked about the value, the learning value, when students can observe other students being tutored. And I've seen other case studies on this as well. So we tried that in our particular case. I also use in our PG cert, I also use the chain of whys for reflective practice technique, which is a particular approach to questioning where you get, what is the issue? What do you think caused that issue? What do you think caused that condition? And it helps students to dig down deeper below the surface and get to the heart of what it is they want to find out or what's actually happening. And in conjunction with this, you have to use active listening techniques if you're doing this kind of questioning. So a lot of reframing or checking for understanding. And again, empathy is really key for active listening. The final pedagogical element is strength-based feedback. And I've become a big advocate of this over the years. Instead of picking apart every possible mistake, every place where something could be improved, it's more about identifying what is already working and helping the student to build on, recognize those strengths and build on those strengths. So all of this goes towards building that trust and making it a comfortable place for people to be authentic with each other. So our particular case study is based on a specific kind of scenario, but you can use it in other scenarios too. So I'm the coordinator for the postgraduate certificate in teaching and higher education at Aberystwyth University. And we have 2 modules in the second, and so I'm going to talk about our second module. But the students on my modules are members of teaching staff. They could be graduate teaching assistants, or they could be people who support student learning in other ways. And in this module, our participants run action research projects on their own teaching. And what they need to do, as in with any kind of research project, is to evaluate the effectiveness of whatever it is they're doing and find an answer to their research question. So even though this is about teaching teachers in a sense, this can be applied to any small group tutorial context, even undergraduate projects of any kind. So the way I did this before, I would invite participants to request individual consultations. These were coaching sessions in my office, one-to-one, and I would use that, you know, chain of whys and strength-based feedback and that kind of thing, active listening in those sessions. So I'm not telling them, I'm listening and responding to what they're saying. These are quite attuned to their specific project, so each conversation is different, but there are some themes in common that sometimes emerge. Well, this was really great, but not all students request consultations. So quite often the ones who didn't will come back later and say, oh, I didn't ask the right evaluation question, so I don't have enough useful data to answer my research question and to put into my project report. So I really wanted to help them at an earlier stage before they run their questionnaires. So that was my particular pinch point for this particular cohort. In your own practice, it might be something different. So the thing that I did that was different is vicarious learning. So students are observing coaching conversations with their peers. And it amazed me, to be honest, how much they learned from that. We did this online, and that allowed using MS Teams, and that allowed me to invite everybody in the group for an optional session, and whoever wants to come can come. So they don't have to contact me and ask for an individual consultation. Everybody's invited, so that's more equal. We're working in the small groups rather than one-to-one. The students can share their screens, which is better than bringing in a piece of paper, you know, or maybe just talking, because it's more visual and everyone can see clearly. And then we use the chat for rich feedback. So this is what the session looks like. 2 to 5 students in a session, runs for an hour or maybe a bit longer. Work with one student at a time. They share their project ideas on the screen, maybe their draft evaluation questions, what have you. We have dialogic feedback. During this process, I can type into the chat or they can type into the chat. And this is where I use the active listening technique sometimes to say, it sounds like what you're saying is this, is that right? And then we work until we get that right. So mutual negotiation of meaning. And everybody can save the chat so that the students don't need to rely on taking notes and maybe missing something because we've got a document and everyone can see that. So now what I really like to do, and I can't wait, is to invite Tamsin to talk about what it was like, what the student experience was like. And I'll just advance these slides as you go.
Great, thank you very much. So I am the student in this context. I am an academic skills tutor in the rest of the time. So I can't actually see the slide at the moment. Right, brilliant. Thank you. So these were a few things that I have observed from taking part. So I was the person getting feedback and watching other people get feedback. So one of the things that was useful was that you could see what other people found useful. So then you could think about that and decide, oh, would that be useful for my project? Next. And then what happened was that the discussion of other peers' projects meant that you could see what was suitable for your own project. So it was much easier to see that somebody had a great idea, but it was huge and they couldn't do it in the time available than identifying that with your own project. And so that was very helpful. Because then you could identify it with your own project. So you also got feedback that addressed similar issues in your own project. So basically you didn't have to ask the tutor. So you could identify problems and then you could change things before you even got to do feedback. So you had more time for other feedback as a result. Next. So also being in a group was really helpful as a feeling of sort of being a part of a group experience, because teaching and research are quite isolated, particularly during COVID when maybe you don't see any colleagues. So that was really useful. And I also found it really helpful because my background is social science research. I'm an economic geographer by training. It was really useful to see like approaches from different backgrounds and seeing how you could apply them to a different subject area. And this is the last one. And you didn't lose anything compared to an individual discussion, but one of the things I found was that you needed to make sure that you concentrated on the feedback that other people had, because otherwise you thought you were so busy writing maybe something down yourself that you didn't notice something important, and then you were like, oh, that sounded really important, I should have written that down. So that's something that you kind of have to think about. So just next. So basically, as regards to the impact of this feedback on my action research, I was kind of understanding the action research process better because I had, an idea of what other people were doing and how it was working for them. So that was really helpful. And the next one was the group aspect and the fact that you got similar methodological questions and issues arising, even though maybe like one person was doing maths, and one person is doing art, but actually the same sort of questions arose, methodological questions. And that was really helpful for sort of identifying issues that maybe I hadn't thought of before in my own research.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tamsin. And so as you can see, some of the commonalities are not necessarily discipline specific. And I think there's a lot of, I would like to encourage you who are in the audience to apply these ideas in your own small group tutorial context. We've got 3 takeaway messages. One is build trust and inclusion. The other is ways to encourage clear thinking. And then the final thing is the value, which I hadn't fully anticipated, of students observing these coaching conversations with their peers. So we've given Future Teacher a handout with the links. Here are the sources. And I've got a contact details. If you would like to get in touch with us, let us know, and we'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to end the show.
Brilliant timing, even before the bird bell was ready to ring.
Before the bird bell, isn't that great? Let me just
You beat the bird bell.
I need to stop sharing. Have I stopped sharing? Oh, here we go. We'll click that one. There we go.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And there's some comments again that you might like to pick up. And obviously we can pick these up in the discussion session a little bit later on as well. So thank you very much, Mary and Tamsin. And now we've kind of crept our way up from looking at the student perspective, looking at the teaching and learning perspective. And we're now going to pick up on the strategic perspective. And I came across Helen Williams' work earlier in the month in a conversation about accessibility and so on. And Helen suddenly piped up in this meeting, well, actually, we do this, we check all our tools that we're using for accessibility and for other things as well. So I thought, fantastic, let's hear what Helen does. So Helen Williams from Nottingham is going to speak to you about the strategic end of getting feedback from students and what you might need to think about as an organisation. So are you ready then?
Yeah.
Lovely job, thank you.
I don't have any slides to talk about, and hopefully I can bring together some of the experiences of both of these papers and kind of pick up on that commonality of the point of feedback and how we engage in feedback processes with students. So I'll start with the accessibility side of things, and then I'll kind of transition into points that I think connect the 2 previous presentations to each other. So the reason that Alistair mentioned that he asked me to come was through something that I do as the Digital Learning Director for the Faculty of Social Sciences at my university, where we're going through a process of trying to implement much better policies and procedures around accessibility. And this is something that we've been working on for quite a few years now. It's something I care about a lot, and that in a smaller context before coming to that role, I tried to work with a lot of staff awareness within my own subject area, which is politics and international relations. so the kind of wider context of this is that we actually have an institutional procedure for basically vetting the digital tools that we use to try to make sure that they're meeting minimum accessibility standards before we make them available to staff. So our learning technology team go through new tools. For example, we recently rolled out H5P within the institution, and they went through several months of accessibility and systems compliance checking before this was rolled out to the institution. And what this did was it meant that they had to decide to turn off some of the features that people were most looking forward to using, because actually those features caused problems for meeting baseline accessibility standards. And so our position has generally been, essentially, don't tempt people with things that we don't want them to be using because we know it's going to cause problems for any users who have a common set of disabilities. But then we try to raise awareness with staff of why we've made these decisions. And I don't want to paint this as a perfect rosy picture that everybody complies with this and everything that people is doing is accessible. It's certainly not. But we're trying to set a baseline where people can at least understand where we're coming from. And what this means is that we have essentially a list of approved tools. But those are also tools that, to touch on some of the other conversation that was going on, they also have things that are vetted for the kind of confidentiality versus anonymity. And we did have an incident that arose a couple of years ago in the use of a polling tool where it was fully anonymous, and there was a racist incident involving open text comments. And because it was fully anonymous, they were never able to get to the bottom of who had posted this incredibly offensive open text comment. And this led to a much firmer institutional position on these, that essentially it needs to be a tool that we have a subscription to, that we've vetted for accessibility, that we've checked that if a situation like that arises, we can actually follow it up properly, but also to get people to think about, you know, if you're running polling in your sessions, is there a specific reason that you're using open text? If you're using open text, thinking through what's the value added of taking that approach? What are the safeguards that are in place? So whether you're turning on things that allow you to vet the questions before they post, whether it's something that you as a teacher can look through the list, but that the students themselves aren't seeing it, or that it's a confidential system where it does track who submitted it, but that's confidential, that other students can't see who's posted that particular question. So that's a kind of unfortunate side of some of the enforcement of what tools people use. But I want to put a more positive side on that, and that's about trying to limit cognitive load for both staff and students in the choice of tools. So our usual advice to people is, within your academic unit, degree program, team, don't use more than 2 tools to achieve the same purpose. So if we're talking about polling and quizzes, don't use more than 2 platforms. And we know that people get really excited about particular tools, like some people love the game functionality of Kahoot, and some people love the visual functionality of Mentimeter, or they like the kind of integration with the wider Microsoft sphere of MS Forms. But we try to get people to coordinate across their teams and think about, that's great if you're doing that in a module perspective, but take a step back and think about the cognitive load that this places on students or on other staff who might be providing supporting teaching on a series of different modules. When you're then grappling with a load of different platforms, and each time you're having to think through, how do I access my learning? Where does it take place? What do I need to find in order to participate? If you have accessibility issues as well, if you have a visual impairment and you're using a screen reader, all of the extras of navigating a series of different platforms and trying to get people to agree, although it might not be the optimum solution on an individual module, thinking, where can we kind of find a compromise that everybody's willing to commit to, that simplifies the amount of different platforms people are navigating. I would say also thinking about the constructive alignment of the use of those tools. So even though I'm digital learning director, it doesn't mean I go whole hog for digital's sake. It's thinking about what is the pedagogical reason for choosing this tool, and how does this achieve a better learning gain or a better learner experience and engagement with that learning process. So sometimes what this has meant is we've had staff who've been really successful in using asynchronous polling and quizzes, for example, between sessions. And often they'll use open text comments with those to gather things where students haven't understood, or areas where they particularly want to focus on during a teaching session. So in those cases, the asynchronous element actually helps structure the synchronous content better. When it's used in a session, I would chime in with what some of the previous presenters said as well about usually multiple choice, and thinking about the fact that using synchronous polling is going to slow things down. So you do need to cut back on the amount of content. As a teacher, you then need to be able to respond instantaneously to what's coming through and reshape your teaching session. So for early career teachers, that can be a really challenging situation, and that might be something that people find really, really tough. Some people like to use them really quickly at the end as an exit ticket, but I would also agree with what the previous presentation said about the importance of not just end loading everything when people are packing up and getting ready to go. And students tend to respond better to a couple of questions sprinkled in here and there. So when we think about the feedback side of this is what we sometimes lose sight of. And I think that brings in the experiences of the second presentation, where what we're doing with polling and quizzes is actually collecting feedback and engaging in that dialogic process with students. But the importance is that we need to convey that to them. We need them to understand that we are engaging in a reflective process, both the teacher in terms of reflecting on what your students do and don't understand, and that you're engaging the student in the reflective process to identify where their learning gaps are and what they need to do to close those gaps and achieve the session aims. And sometimes we lose sight of that in kind of rolling out whizzy tools, because we're forgetting about the explanation of why are we doing this? What does this add to their ability to engage with their learning process? I would also say that it can be useful and fun, but that not all students feel equally engaged with the process of polling and quizzes. So sometimes we have to take a step back and think about, if this is integrated into the assessment regime, is that going to be equally accessible to all students? If we're using it in a live format, is this going to cause particular problems for students with specific learning difficulties, common visual disabilities, or are we reading out content so that people will still be able to engage with it even if they can't read it on the screen? Do we have ways for them to still engage with the process even if they don't have a device with them, that they can log on to that digital content? So thinking about the impact of digital poverty, of students who don't have smart devices that they can bring with them to teaching sessions. So there's a lot of other kind of underlying aspects that we might lose sight of sometimes when we just get excited about doing polling and quizzes. And hopefully I've talked through some useful points on that.
That's been excellent. Thank you very much. I loved that focus on the pedagogical elements. Sorry, I put my video on now. Yeah, that just bringing us back to the fact, first of all, it's pedagogical. It's not about tools. The tools serve the pedagogy, but also that whole reflective part that we're modeling good practice. We're reflecting as teachers by gathering that feedback in order to improve what we're doing. But lots of really rich comments in there. Thank you very much, Helen, for that. So now there's some comments have been coming in as Helen's been speaking, and so there's been a little bit of overlap on the different sessions within the chat. but we've also got some time now where we can spend what we call our open mic session. So about 10 or 15 minutes or so, where we can pick up from the content in the chat. So anything in specific, either Teresa or Lillian, that you spotted coming through that you'd
Yeah,
like to
so
pick
I
up
think
on?
I think anonymity was a key point of discussion there, and trying to tease out the level of anonymity that students want. So there is an aspect where they don't want to be judged by their peers, or they don't want to be seen to be getting the answer wrong, for instance. However, there is a usefulness in being identifiable to the tutor, who is kind of using it as a form of learning analytics, really, to help the individual student in their understanding. And I don't know if Emily and Kate have any other points to add to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to add one thing. Yeah, it's this very difficult balance here, because as we were discussing in the chat, that oftentimes when there's too much anonymity, and there have been plenty of studies done on this, where that you can kind of get unwanted, malicious things, or just stupid and irrelevant at the best of times, maybe. But it's very important to kind of discuss. And I just wondered, would it be all right if I shared my screen for our report that we did? Because there's a very particular table I wanted to share. And this was about educator perceptions versus student perceptions. And this was basically, they had to rank 7 statements. And as you can see in green, it's kind of like, so how important were these to students, and what did educators think were important to students? And the most interesting to me is this one, which was the idea of avoiding speaking publicly, which was ranked 4th for student, but 1st for educators. And what I was trying to reiterate in the chat is that for this idea of anonymity, it's not so much that students are afraid to speak in person. It's more that they are afraid of being judged and getting questions wrong. And so a live interactive polling, as we just heard from Tamsin, is this idea of accessibility in that sense, right? So for some students, easily able to discuss, no problems, no fear of being wrong. But for students who do feel very self-conscious about the way that they present themselves and the way that they speak, live interactive polling can be a useful tool, but it's about how you implement it. So there's that kind of balance of anonymity there.
That's great. Thank you very much. Like I say, it's really worth looking at their report, because it has a lot of very useful detail that will inform anyone who's planning to use multiple choice or even open text questions in your live teaching sessions.
Could I pick up a point from Emily and Ekaterina? Because one of the things that Helen mentioned that immediately sparked a very positive memory with me was that it doesn't have to be digital. The polling doesn't have to be digital. I remember seeing some fantastic practice, I think it was at the University of Leeds, where all the students had just a little clip together thing with 4 bits of different colored cards, and so the lecturer could instantly at any point say, okay, is the answer to this A, B, C or D? Hold up, and then they would have, each card had a letter on it and a color, and then she could scan the room and she could see most of the cards that were held up were green, and it should have been the red one, so she knows that something needs to be fed back. So I'm just and that was great. It was non-digital, it was instant, it worked. There was none of the digital poverty things that Helen quite rightly talked about. Did you, Emily or Ekaterina, did you come across examples where non-digital types of polling were being used, and were they included in the report?
So unfortunately, the scope of our project was specifically utilizing digital live interactive polling, but in person and online. And also, I just want to correct myself. I think I said Tamsin before about accessibility. I meant to say Helen, so I'd like to apologize for that. I don't know why. Just there we go. However, what we did kind of learn, however, in terms of why some students preferred the online format for the digital live interactive polling than in person, was the simple fact that, as you mentioned, if you can just poll the class by asking, raise your hand if you believe this, raise your hand if you believe this, or someone shout out some, if you see what I mean, especially when it comes to the more quicker questions that can be just done in person. Some students just found the digital format a bit pointless. However, if you've got the correct kinds of questions, though, in a digital format, in an in-person space, that mean you can't just raise your hand and go, okay, why do you think that way? Especially when it comes to maybe larger cohorts, when you want a much wider, scope of feedback from that, it can be more useful in that case. So there was this kind of idea that, is the live interactive polling being implemented in a way that makes sense and is intuitive?
Okay, that's helpful.
Like that point about question intent, are you wanting to find out answers as a teacher, or are you trying to prompt learning in the students? And the students are enough research has been done to prove that students are very savvy about it. And as a teacher, if you're regularly checking in with students to see if they've understood what you've said, and that's all you're using polling for, the rate of participation will drop over time. The students won't even bother to participate, So that's been seen in the research as well. And I just wanted to pick up a point that Mary Jacob mentioned about the strengths-based feedback. I thought that was fabulous. I mean, I use appreciative inquiry, and it just sparked excitement in me straight away, that kind of strength-based appreciative approach to what the students were doing well. And I think that's a very kind of growth approach that's very helpful for the students. And I added in the chat this idea that I had experienced the best feedback I've ever heard was not directed at myself, but to a peer. And it was just a peer sharing session where I learned about this feedback. So I really do, again, as a former student, I would kind of agree that approach of peers being able to observe their peers receiving feedback from a tutor can be very, very powerful. But Mike asked the question about whether it can knock some people's confidence, I guess. Mike, I'm not sure if you want to rephrase your question. Probably phrase it better than me.
Yeah, no, it's the issue that, when you're comparing yourself with others, we do that in projects. I had each student individually. I have a colleague who, for efficiency purposes, puts all his project students together every week at the same time and talks to them. And he said it was really good. One, it made it efficient for him, but the others, it made sure they were all keeping up. So when they saw one of them had got to a certain stage in the project, it made all the others be embarrassed that they were forced to do it. Now, it worked when he had all good students who were really high achievers, but otherwise I found it was terrible. It just sort of affected students really badly.
I wonder if it's almost a case of, in the old days when HR used to do psychometric tests, it's whether you can kind of almost group your students to those with a growth mindset who would appreciate this thing, and the others with a more fixed mindset that would benefit more from, being in a different space and getting the feedback in a different way. Debatable? Mary?
Can I jump in right there? Thank you for that. I put some responses in the chat already, but Mike, I definitely can appreciate the point that you're making. And I think it depends on how the tutor is handling it. It should never be embarrassing any person in the room. That's not the aim of it. So what I do is I kind of try to take a UDL approach so that they can join the group session if they want. Everybody's invited. If they prefer an individual consultation, that's fine. They can get an individual consultation. But it's never about embarrassing somebody, but if anything, inspiring and supporting each other and building that community of practice. But I mean, part of that might depend on whether, if that other lecturer you mentioned was trying to save time for himself, then perhaps the students were picking up on that as being in his interest, but not in theirs, maybe.
Yeah, very good point. Brilliant.
I can remember doing practicing different types of feedback with my own students, and one of the approaches that I tried that I felt was quite successful, it was certainly productive, it was giving group feedback, but those groups being sampled, being very, very carefully chosen so that they were people who needed the same sort of feedback. So people who simply hadn't done enough research, I'd get the 5 or 6 of them together and say, look, the reason you didn't do very well in this is because you haven't got enough research there. The structure was okay, all the rest of it. And so you know who the others are now. You can see each other. In a way, that was giving them that sense of, I'm not the only one with this problem, that there's a group of us. And so you can ask other people, I've done a bit more this time. Do you think this is better? And that I felt was successful. I didn't do it all the time, but there were certainly times of the year where giving feedback in groups like that did help. But it would have been interesting to have then done a subsequent follow-up with the students to get their feedback on how that worked from their perspective.
And just in the interest of equity, I'd really like to, Helen has a hand up. Helen.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that, and that we sometimes lose sight of the need to train students how to give and receive feedback. And just like we need to train staff to be positive in their framing and encouraging and concrete in identifying transferable items, we also have to recognize that students themselves may never have received a good piece of feedback. They don't know how to implement what they receive. And we have to build in a safe environment for them to engage in that process. But so much of what we do is high stakes assessment. It's not iterative. So they're not revisiting the same piece of work multiple times and working on that, which helps to understand what that piece of feedback meant in that context, revisiting that same piece of work, making changes. We do it with dissertations, but that's at the end of a degree. And I try to build it into my first year modules where I create a peer review structure, but I'm really, really careful about the questions I ask. It's things like summarize the person's main argument. And I help them to understand that if what you get back is gobbledygook, it's probably because they didn't understand what your main argument was, but never, ever assessing each other of, this is good or poor, and just helping them to engage in that process of improvement. So they get marks for giving feedback, but they get nothing based on what their peers thought of their work.
Brilliant. That's really, really good. I might tap you, Helen. One of my colleagues is wanting to find out about how to organize, if, like you say, peer assessment.
Emily's got an important point there about in the first years, in particular at university, this the different backgrounds, cultures, schools, etc. people have come from, and that's taking that into account, I think, is really important too.
Yeah, so that feedback literacy is really important to build in from the beginning. Tamsin,
yeah.
I was just thinking, one of the things, of course, about the group that I attended was that all of the people in it are staff, and they are studying. Most of them are probably, they've done 2 or 3 degrees already. So, and they also give feedback themselves. So they're a bit different to a first year student who maybe has never, been through that process. So I think that's a help. And to a certain extent, it felt a bit like a sort of a support group, as opposed to, it didn't feel like, it wasn't an evaluation as such. And I think that's probably quite important to, it's not framed as you're being evaluated. It's framed as, this can kind of help you to do things better.
Yeah, brilliant.
There's some really good material coming into the chat pane at the moment, but I am aware that Ron, were you going to do your bit now? Or did you want me to do the?
Can I fit in one more question?
Oh, yeah.
I'll just fit a question into Helen. So while it was really, really good session, thank you, Helen, for that. I'll be listening back to it and making some key points for myself to pass back on to our teams. I've experienced that when we try to limit the technology, sometimes certain disciplines require or can make a case for needing a specific tool to support their pedagogy. And what would you do in that case?
Oh, I completely support it. So that's why I say limiting the platforms within an academic unit or degree program.
Okay.
Because I think within that context, people should be able to come to a common understanding of a range of platforms. I absolutely agree that that is not the same range of platforms across an entire institution because of the very different context people are working in.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So yeah, over to Ron.
I'll quickly share my screen, but I put a couple of notes in the text chat. So the registration for the next session is already open. If you're seeing my screen here, we have this panel that basically is the summary of the list of new stuff for this session today, but then you'll find all the previous presentations and recordings from the previous years lower down in the page. And the recording from today's session will be available at some point, probably next week or fairly soon anyway. And we notify that via our mailing list. So if you're not a member of the mailing list already, there's a link there to join the mailing list. We have an expression of interest to be a guest speaker form, and there's a link here. So if you're inspired to share your own feedback on how you've been using the practice outlined in any of our topics coming up, then please do complete that, and you can go through the list and indicate which topics you might be interested in. So I think there are 19 topics in total. The next one is on collaborative teaching and learning, but as you'll see, there's lots of others. And one of the things that struck me about some of the discussion is in the audio session, I think we've got discussion about audio visual feedback, which can be very effective and a good option compared with written feedback and so on. So a rich resource over numerous years now, and as we've said, what we're hoping people do now is reflect more on all of that and how things have changed and so on. So we ask you in the text chat to try to be fairly specific about what one thing you might do as a result of what you've seen and heard today. So please do that before you leave. And then when we stop the recording, we usually have an informal chat too, while people are still around. And that can be quite enlightening because the mics are off and the recording's off. And sometimes we get some nuggets of useful discussion there. So thanks everyone for joining. Please do put your thoughts in the text chat, and we're not going yet. We've got a couple of minutes and then the informal chat as well. So I've stopped my sharing and we'll just carry on that discussion.
Thank you very much to our speakers. It's been really interesting and so grounded. That's what I love about these sessions. We have some background, we have some theory, some frameworks and things, but the bit that's most brilliant is that it's grounded in people's real experience. So thank you. So what are your one things? What one things will you be doing?